The reservation at Claridge's had been secured 3 weeks in advance. Noah had achieved perfect scores in the regional science competition, outperforming students from private academies despite our modest public school resources. His project on sustainable marine ecosystems had captivated the judges. As his guardian since my daughter's military deployment overseas, I wanted to celebrate his achievement properly. Not with pizza or burgers, but somewhere special that would make him feel as extraordinary as his accomplishment. When we arrived at Claridge's that evening, Noah's eyes widened at the opulent interior. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, white tablecloths draped over polished mahogany tables. Servers in crisp black uniforms glided between diners with practiced precision. Near the entrance, a massive glass tank housed live lobsters, their claws secured with rubber bands as they crawled over one another in blue-tinted water. "This place is amazing, Grandpa," Noah whispered as the host led us to our table. His eyes darted everywhere, taking in the ornate decor and studying the patrons with their expensive watches and designer clothes. I smiled at his wonder, knowing this experience would become a cherished memory for both of us. The menu prices would consume nearly half my monthly discretionary budget, but seeing Noah dressed in his best blue button-down shirt and khaki pants, nervously adjusting his napkin on his lap, made every dollar worthwhile. He had practiced his table manners diligently for this occasion. His straight posture and careful handling of the silverware reflected his determination to belong in this upscale environment. We had just received our appetizers when I noticed her across the dining room. Deborah Lancaster sat with 3 other women, their laughter carrying across the restaurant as they clinked wine glasses. My stomach tightened instantly. As president of our Highland Estates HOA, Deborah had made our lives increasingly difficult since we moved in 2 years ago. She wielded the community rulebook like a weapon, selectively enforcing regulations depending on her personal relationships with neighbors. Noah followed my gaze. "Is that Mrs. Lancaster?" he asked quietly. I nodded, hoping she would not notice us. "Just enjoy your meal, buddy. This is your night." But fate had other plans. Deborah excused herself from her table and headed toward the restrooms. Her path took her directly past our table. When her eyes landed on us, her expression transformed from surprise to something darker. She stopped, surveying us with unmistakable disdain, as if we were intruders in her exclusive territory. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The Millers in Claridge's, how unexpected." I forced a polite smile. "Good evening, Mrs. Lancaster. My grandson earned top honors at the regional science competition. We are celebrating." Noah smiled shyly, extending his hand. "Hello, Mrs. Lancaster." What happened next occurred with such speed that nearby diners gasped in unison. Deborah's face contorted with inexplicable rage. "You do not belong here," she hissed, and before I could react, her hand swung forward, connecting with Noah's cheek with a sharp crack that seemed to silence the entire restaurant. The restaurant chaos faded momentarily as my mind flashed back to our first meeting with Deborah Lancaster. It had been during our initial HOA orientation, just 3 weeks after moving into Highland Estates. I had purchased the modest 3-bedroom home after my retirement, creating a stable environment for Noah while my daughter served her 4th military deployment. The neighborhood seemed perfect, well-maintained properties, a community pool, and proximity to excellent schools. That first evening, Deborah had smiled warmly, welcoming us to the community with practiced charm. She had handed me a thick binder of HOA regulations, emphasizing the importance of maintaining property values through consistent standards. Her smile never reached her eyes as she scanned our modest furnishings through the open door. The friendly facade dissolved just days later when the first violation notice appeared on our door. "Unauthorized landscaping modification," the citation read, referring to the heritage rose bushes I had planted along our front walkway. The irony was not lost on me when I discovered identical rose bushes flourishing in front of Deborah's substantially larger home across the neighborhood. When I pointed this out at the next HOA meeting, she dismissed my concern with practiced ease. "My varieties were pre-approved years ago," she explained condescendingly. "Perhaps you should have reviewed the bylaws more carefully before making changes." This established the pattern that would define our next 2 years in Highland Estates. My mailbox was 2 inches too tall according to sudden measurement standards. The shed in our backyard, built by the Prevy. O's owner was improperly permitted despite documentation proving otherwise. Our holiday decorations were excessive, while her elaborate display earned community recognition. The financial impact was significant on my fixed retirement income. Each violation carried fines that accumulated when not addressed within arbitrary timeframes. Appeals mysteriously disappeared from administrative records. When I organized a group of similarly affected neighbors to attend monthly meetings, Deborah simply rescheduled them to weekday afternoons when most working residents could not attend. Her systematic targeting extended beyond property issues. Noah became a special focus of her attention after I questioned the allocation of HOA funds during a rare evening meeting. The basketball hoop I installed for him received immediate citation, though identical hoops stood in driveways throughout the neighborhood. The bicycle he occasionally left on our front porch overnight generated $75 fines. Even the wind chimes I purchased for his birthday were deemed noise pollution despite their gentle tones. Behind her enforcement lay a web of personal connections that insulated her from accountability. Her husband golfed weekly with half the board members. Her brother-in-law worked for the property management company that administered violation notices. Her close friend served as neighborhood architectural review chair, approving or denying modification requests based on personal relationships rather than consistent standards. I discovered through neighbor conversations that Deborah maintained two separate standards within Highland Estates. Residents she deemed quality homeowners received casual warnings rather than formal citations. Those she considered beneath her social station faced immediate penalties for identical infractions. Our middle-class status and Noah's presence, a child in what she considered an adult community, placed us firmly in her target category. My attempts to work through proper channels repeatedly hit dead ends. Letters to the board went unanswered. Requests for variance hearings were perpetually postponed. Documentation of selective enforcement disappeared from community records. While my retirement savings dwindled from accumulating fines, Deborah proudly announced increased property values at quarterly meetings, taking personal credit for maintaining neighborhood standards through diligent oversight. The community's growing resentment remained largely underground. Neighbors complained privately, but few risked public confrontation. Those who stood against her typically moved away within months, unable to endure the financial and emotional toll of her targeted harassment. My military background had taught me resilience, but watching Noah's spirits diminish under constant scrutiny tested my resolve daily. And now, watching Noah hold his reddened cheek in this elegant restaurant, all those accumulated injustices crystallized into something powerful and cold within me. This was not just about property violations or petty power. Deborah Lancaster had struck my grandson, assaulted a child in public, revealing the true nature of her character to everyone present. The restaurant patrons stared in horror as Noah's eyes filled with tears, not from physical pain, but from the humiliation of being struck by an adult in such a public setting. The restaurant fell silent for 3 heartbeats after the slap. Then came the collective gasp as reality caught up with perception. Noah sat frozen, his hand pressed against his cheek, eyes wide with disbelief and humiliation. The couple at the adjacent table lowered their forks. The waiter carrying a tray of drinks stopped mid-stride. Every eye in the dining room locked onto our table. My military training kicked in, suppressing my first violent impulse. I focused on Noah first, placing my arm protectively around his shoulders. "Are you okay, buddy?" I asked quietly, though I knew he was not. The physical pain would fade quickly, but the public humiliation would linger. Deborah stepped back, instantly pivoting to defense mode. "He was being disruptive," she announced loudly, though Noah had been sitting perfectly still when she approached. "This establishment has standards." The restaurant manager materialized beside our table. Dark-suited and professional, his face betrayed controlled alarm. "What is happening here?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral though his eyes darted between Noah's reddened cheek and Deborah's defensive posture. "This woman just struck my grandson," I stated calmly, restraining the rage building inside me. "A 12-year-old child, unprovoked." Deborah scoffed dramatically, hardly unprovoked. The boy was making faces at me across the restaurant. I simply taught him some manners since his guardian obviously has not. Noah shook his head, too shocked to speak. The absolute falsehood of her claim was evident to everyone who had witnessed the encounter. Several diners were already murmuring among themselves, and I noticed at least 3 people discreetly holding phones at angles suggesting they were recording. The manager turned to Deborah. "Ma'am, regardless of any perceived provocation, we cannot allow physical confrontation in our establishment, particularly involving a minor." Deborah's expression shifted immediately. Standing straighter, she adjusted her designer handbag on her shoulder and lowered her voice to a condescending whisper that carried perfectly in the hushed restaurant. "Do you know how much money I spend here monthly? The Delanceys and I have standing Saturday reservations. I am personal friends with your regional manager, Charles Wilmot." The name-dropping did not produce her desired effect. The manager's professional demeanor cooled further. "I am aware of your patronage, Mrs. Lancaster. However, our policy regarding physical confrontation is absolute. I must ask you to return to your table while I address this situation." I could have escalated the confrontation then. My hands had curled into fists beneath the table. 25 years of military discipline held me back. Not here, not now, not like this. A different approach was forming in my mind, something far more effective than a momentary outburst. "Would you like me to call the police, sir?" the manager asked me quietly. Before I could answer, an elderly gentleman at a nearby table stood up and approached us. His tailored suit and deliberate movement suggested someone accustomed to authority. He placed a business card on our table without looking at Deborah. "Former district attorney," he said softly. "What she did constitutes assault on a minor, multiple witnesses. Call me tomorrow." He glanced at Noah with genuine concern before returning to his table. Deborah's face tightened, but she maintained her composure, clearly recognizing the shifting dynamics. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "I barely touched him." I looked at Noah, whose initial shock was transforming to embarrassment as he realized he had become the center of attention in the upscale restaurant. "Would you prefer to leave, buddy?" I asked gently. He nodded, eyes downcast. I turned to the manager. "We will be departing. Our appetite has been spoiled." "Of course," he responded promptly. "There will be no charge for your meal. And please," he added, lowering his voice, "contact me personally tomorrow. Our security cameras cover every angle of the dining room." As we stood to leave, I caught Deborah's satisfied smirk. She believed she had won again, forced us to retreat from another space she considered her territory. She had no idea that I was not retreating. I was regrouping. The cold, strategic part of my military training had activated. As we walked toward the exit, I heard her return to her table, already spinning the narrative to her friends. "Some people simply do not understand appropriate behavior," she announced loudly enough for us to hear. Noah's shoulders slumped further. I squeezed them gently. "This is not over," I whispered to him, "not by a long shot." Dawn found me at my computer, still awake after a night spent researching rather than sleeping. Noah had finally fallen asleep around midnight, his usual resilience temporarily broken by the public humiliation. I had assured him repeatedly that Deborah's behavior reflected her own character flaws, not anything he had done. Eventually, emotional exhaustion had pulled him into restless sleep. I had not joined him in slumber. Instead, I had transformed our home office into a command center. 2 decades of military intelligence work had taught me how to gather information, identify vulnerabilities, and develop strategic approaches to complex problems. Deborah Lancaster was about to discover she had assaulted the grandson of the wrong retired Army intelligence officer. My first call came at 7:00 a.m. to the restaurant manager, who answered on the first ring despite the early hour. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice conveying genuine concern, "how is your grandson?" "Recovering," I responded. "I appreciate your attention yesterday. I understand your security system might have captured the incident." "Yes, sir, I have already isolated the footage from multiple angles. What happened was clearly unprovoked. Mrs. Lancaster approached your table and struck your grandson without any interaction from him whatsoever. I have preserved this footage and can provide it to you or to the authorities. Please email it directly to me, I requested, providing my address. And I would appreciate your discretionary silence until certain legal matters are arranged. Of course, he agreed. Between us, Mrs. Lancaster has displayed questionable behavior toward our staff previously. Her status as a regular does not excuse her conduct. Within an hour, 3 video files arrived in my inbox, clear digital footage showing Deborah approaching our table. Noah's polite greeting and her unprovoked slap. The evidence was incontrovertible. My second call went to the retired district attorney who had offered his card. Walter Simmons had served 27 years in the county prosecutor's office before transitioning to private practice focusing on community legal issues. He listened quietly as I described the broader pattern of harassment beyond the restaurant incident. What she did constitutes assault on a minor, Walter confirmed. The restaurant footage provides clear evidence. Combined with the documented pattern of targeted harassment through the HOA, you have grounds for both criminal charges and civil action. I want to proceed carefully, I explained. This cannot be dismissed as a neighborhood dispute or isolated incident. Strategic approach, Walter agreed. I understand completely. Start gathering everything: HOA violation notices, evidence of selective enforcement, witness statements from other residents. Build a comprehensive case before making any move. My military training had instilled the importance of reconnaissance before engagement. I spent the next 3 days methodically building my case while Noah recovered at home, the school nurse supportive after I explained the situation. Social media provided unexpected ammunition. Deborah had actually posted about the restaurant incident the morning after, had to teach manners to an ill-behaved child at Claridge's last night. Some parents simply do not understand proper public behavior. Quality establishments hash proper upbringing. Her digital arrogance provided written admission of the assault. Former HOA board members proved surprisingly cooperative when approached individually. 3 former members shared documented instances of financial irregularities during Deborah's tenure, selective waiving of fees for friends, questionable allocation of landscaping contracts to her brother-in-law's company, and altered meeting minutes that removed resident complaints from official records. The neighborhood listserv archive yielded further evidence. When searched chronologically, a clear pattern emerged of residents who questioned Deborah's leadership, subsequently receiving multiple violation notices within days of their public comments. Several families had moved away, specifically citing HOA harassment in their farewell messages to neighbors. Most valuable was Deborah's professional connection. As Vice President of Community Relations at Lancaster Real Estate Development, a company founded by her father-in-law, she regularly leveraged her HOA leadership as evidence of her community-building expertise in professional profiles. Her company biography specifically highlighted her role in maintaining property values through consistent standards enforcement and building harmonious residential communities. Her entire professional identity rested on a carefully cultivated image that my evidence would systematically dismantle. The County Property Records Office provided additional documentation. Properties owned by Deborah's immediate family had received HOA-funded improvements through community beautification initiatives, while similar properties owned by unrelated residents received violation notices for identical conditions. The pattern of self-dealing was undeniable once properly documented. My neighbors proved eager allies once approached individually. Years of accumulated resentment translated into detailed statements describing personal experiences with Deborah's selective enforcement. Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down provided photographs of her cited unapproved garden stakes, alongside identical unsighted stakes in Deborah's garden. The Rodriguez family shared email exchanges showing their denied request for a backyard pergola identical to one Deborah had approved for her sister's property. On the 4th day, I contacted the local real estate association where Deborah served on the ethics committee. Without revealing my full evidence, I discreetly inquired about their process for reviewing member conduct that potentially violates professional standards. The secretary mentioned Deborah was currently under consideration for their annual Community Leadership Excellence Award, information I carefully noted for strategic timing. Walter Simmons reviewed my compiled evidence on day 5, his expression growing increasingly grave as he examined each document. This goes beyond HOA overreach, he concluded. There are potential criminal issues here: misappropriation of funds, falsification of records, now assault on a minor. You have built an extraordinarily comprehensive case. What would you recommend as next steps? I asked. Two parallel approaches, he advised. Criminal charges for the assault, filed with the county prosecutor with the video evidence. Simultaneously, a formal presentation to the HOA board with all residents present. The public nature of the revelation will prevent any behind-the-scenes dismissal. I nodded, already formulating the exact timing for maximum impact. The monthly HOA meeting is scheduled for next Thursday evening. I understand the Real Estate Association awards ceremony is the following morning. Walter smiled slightly. Perfect timing for both proceedings. The assault charges will be public record by then. That evening, as Noah worked on his science homework at the kitchen table, his resilience gradually returning, I felt a sense of calm purpose replace my initial rage. This would not be a vengeful outburst, but a methodical dismantling of a system of abuse. Deborah Lancaster had spent years building her power structure on intimidation and selective enforcement. I would dismantle it through documentation and due process. "How are you feeling, buddy?" I asked Noah. He looked up from his textbook. "Better. Are we really going to do something about Mrs. Lancaster?" "Yes," I replied simply. "Justice takes time, but it is coming." The week before the HOA meeting unfolded with precision timing. Each element of my plan locked into place like the mechanical components of a military operation. Walter Simmons filed formal assault charges with the county prosecutor on Monday morning, ensuring the case would enter public records by Wednesday afternoon. The prosecutor, reviewing the restaurant security footage, immediately approved the charges. Tuesday evening, I initiated Phase 2. 23 separate text messages went out to affected neighbors, containing a simple request. Highland Estates HOA concerns will be addressed Thursday 7 p.m. Your presence would be appreciated. The deliberately vague wording prevented any leak to Deborah while ensuring maximum attendance. Wednesday morning brought confirmation that Deborah remained oblivious to the approaching storm. Her social media featured a carefully staged photo of her arranging flowers for the HOA meeting room with the caption, "Preparing for another productive community meeting." Leadership is about creating beautiful spaces for meaningful dialogue. Community Leadership HOA Excellence. That afternoon, I visited 3 strategic locations. First, the community center where our meetings were held, arriving during the maintenance staff's lunch break. The aging audiovisual system received a subtle upgrade, a small wireless transmitter that would connect directly to my laptop upon activation. Next, the county courthouse, where I confirmed the assault charges had been properly entered into public record, accessible to anyone performing a background check. Finally, the local print shop, where 27 identical folders awaited pickup, each containing meticulously organized evidence. Thursday morning, I dressed with deliberate care: conservative navy suit, subtle tie, polished shoes. Professional, respectable, not the appearance of someone mounting a vendetta, but of someone performing a civic duty. Noah watched my preparation with solemn understanding. "You do not need to attend tonight," I assured him. "This might become uncomfortable." "I want to be there," he replied with quiet determination. "Mrs. Lancaster needs to know she cannot just hit people and walk away." His courage strengthened my resolve. The military had taught me that true leadership required standing firm against injustice, even when personally uncomfortable. Noah was learning that lesson earlier than most. By 6:30 p.m., the HOA meeting room had filled beyond capacity. Neighbors who had not attended meetings in months arrived early, murmuring curiously about the purpose of their summoning. The regular board members took their seats at the front table, surprised by the unprecedented turnout. At 6:45, as expected, Deborah entered with her customary authority, leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Her momentary surprise at the crowded room quickly transformed to satisfaction, clearly interpreting the attendance as validation of her leadership. She nodded approvingly at the board members before taking her central position. I sat quietly in the third row, the folder containing my presentation placed neatly on my lap. "Good evening, everyone," Deborah began promptly at 7:00 p.m., striking her gavel with practiced authority. "How wonderful to see such community engagement. We have several important items on our agenda tonight, beginning with the approval of last month's minutes." The procedural matters proceeded normally for 20 minutes: budget updates, landscaping reports, approval of architectural review decisions. With each agenda item, Deborah grew visibly more comfortable, clearly believing the unusual attendance reflected growing community support for her leadership. At 7:25 p.m., she reached the final scheduled item. "That concludes our regular business," she announced, preparing to adjourn, "unless there are new concerns from the floor." The moment had arrived. I stood calmly, making eye contact with Walter Simmons, who had positioned hymns. "Elf near the door. I would like to address some community concerns," I stated clearly. Deborah's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Miller, we typically require advance notice for presentation of new business. This relates directly to community governance and financial management," I replied evenly. "Both are appropriate for open discussion according to our bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph 3. The specific citation of bylaw provisions visibly startled her. She had not expected someone to know the rules as well as she manipulated them. 3 board members exchanged concerned glances, clearly unaccustomed to procedural challenges. "Very well," she conceded with forced graciousness. "You have 5 minutes for your concerns." "Thank you." I moved toward the presentation table, connecting my laptop to the projector as I spoke. "I would like to address what appears to be a systematic pattern of selective enforcement and financial irregularities within our HOA governance." The room fell silent as I distributed the prepared folders to each board member. These documents contain evidence of concerning administrative practices that affect our entire community. Deborah's expression hardened as she flipped open her folder, scanning the first page of meticulously organized evidence. The color drained slowly from her face as she registered the comprehensive nature of the documentation: side-by-side photographs showing identical violations treated differently, financial records highlighting questionable allocations, testimony from former board members. "This is inappropriate for open session," she attempted, closing her folder abruptly. "These are administrative matters for board review." "On the contrary," I continued calmly, advancing to the first slide of my presentation, "these are community-wide concerns requiring transparent discussion. Highland Estates bylaws specifically prohibit selective enforcement of regulations, yet the evidence suggests systematic targeting of certain residents." As the presentation progressed through its damning evidence, Deborah's composure began visibly cracking. The restaurant video remained my final exhibit, held in reserve for precisely the right moment. Noah sat quietly beside our neighbor Mrs. Chen, his presence a silent testimony to the personal impact of Deborah's abuses of power. The conference room had transformed from administrative formality to riveted attention. Every neighbor leaned forward, recognition dawning on their faces, as my presentation methodically revealed the pattern they had experienced individually, but never seen documented collectively. The evidence was irrefutable: identical violations resulting in immediate fines for some households while receiving complete exemptions for others. Deborah attempted to regain control halfway through my presentation. "Mr. Miller is clearly pursuing a personal vendetta," she declared, rising from her chair. "This is not an appropriate use of community meeting time." Board member Richard Thompson, typically Deborah's reliable ally, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Actually, these allegations appear substantive and well documented. As treasurer, I am particularly concerned about these financial discrepancies." He tapped the section highlighting landscaping contracts awarded to Deborah's brother-in-law at rates 30% above competing bids. "Procedural oversights at worst," Deborah dismissed, though her voice had lost its characteristic authority, and completely out of context. "Perhaps we should hear from other community members," suggested board member Elizabeth Chen, looking around the room. "Are others experiencing similar concerns?" The floodgates opened. Neighbors who had suffered silently for years suddenly found their voices. Martin Rodriguez detailed 3 rejected architectural requests for features identical to those approved for Deborah's friends. Elderly Mrs. Abernathy described receiving violation notices for her medical equipment ramp, while Deborah's temporary party structures remained unsighted for months. Each testimony built upon the previous, creating an undeniable pattern of abuse. "These are isolated incidents being mischaracterized," Deborah insisted, her knuckles whitening around her gavel, "and entirely unrelated to proper HOA governance." "Actually, they establish a clear pattern of selective enforcement," countered Walter Simmons, standing from his seat. "As a former district attorney, I recognize systematic abuse of authority when I see it. These actions potentially violate state HOA regulations regarding equal application of community standards." Deborah's expression shifted from dismissal to growing concern as she recognized Walter from the restaurant. She clearly had not anticipated his professional background or his involvement in this confrontation. Her eyes darted toward the exit, calculating her options for regaining control of the narrative. "If there are administrative cons, RNS, they should be submitted in writing to the board," she attempted, gathering her papers as if preparing to end the meeting. "This public forum is not the appropriate venue." "On the contrary," I replied calmly, "public accountability is precisely what has been lacking, and there is one final matter that transcends administrative concerns entirely." The room fell silent as I advanced to the final slide, a still image from the restaurant security footage showing Deborah's hand mid-slap against my grandson's face. "This incident occurred last week at Claridge's restaurant," I stated, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the image. "Mrs. Lancaster physically assaulted my 12-year-old grandson in a public venue, unprovoked, witnessed by dozens of patrons." Audible gasps rippled through the room. Even board members who had remained impassive during financial discussions recoiled visibly at the image. "That is not what happened," Deborah protested, her voice rising. "The boy was misbehaving. The image is taken out of context." "Perhaps we should view the complete footage," I suggested, clicking to start the video. The room watched in stunned silence as the high-definition security footage played. Noah's polite greeting, Deborah's approach, the unprovoked slap, the shocked reactions of nearby diners, the restaurant manager's intervention, Deborah's entitled response. The evidence was undeniable. When the video concluded, the silence hung heavy for several seconds before board member Thompson spoke. "Mrs. Lancaster, is this accurate? Did you strike this child?" "He was being disrespectful," she insisted, though her voice had lost all conviction. "I see no disrespect in this video," Elizabeth Chen stated firmly. "Only a child being struck by an adult in a public place." "This goes beyond HOA matters," Richard Thompson added, visibly disturbed. "This is a criminal issue." "Indeed it is," confirmed Walter Simmons, rising again. "Formal assault charges were filed with the county prosecutor yesterday morning. The case number and documentation are included in your packets, page 14. As if on cue, the conference room door opened. 2 uniformed police officers entered quietly, nodding respectfully to Walter before approaching the board table. The timing was not coincidental. Walter had coordinated their arrival to coincide precisely with this moment in the presentation. "Deborah Lancaster," the senior officer inquired professionally. "This is outrageous," Deborah sputtered, her composure completely abandoned. "You cannot possibly." "We have a formal summons regarding assault charges," the officer continued calmly. "You have the right to legal representation at your hearing, scheduled for next Tuesday at 9:00 a.m. The collected authority in the officer's voice silenced Deborah's protests. She accepted the document with trembling hands as the community watched in stunned silence. From the back of the room, a voice I recognized as belonging to Sandra Wilkins, the local real estate association representative, spoke clearly. In light of these revelations, the association will be postponing consideration of Mrs. Lancaster's Leadership Excellence Award nomination pending full investigation. Deborah's face crumpled momentarily before hardening into anger. Her water glass toppled as she gathered her materials, liquid spreading across her carefully arranged papers. "This is a coordinated attack," she hissed, eyes locking with mine. "You planned this entire spectacle." "No, Deborah," I replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You built this outcome yourself, one abuse at a time. I simply documented what you chose to do." The community remained silent as she stormed from the room, the police officers following at a respectful distance. The board members exchanged glances of shock and dismay before Richard Thompson cleared his throat again. "I believe we need to schedule an emergency board meeting to address these serious allegations and establish interim leadership," he announced, "and to begin reviewing all outstanding violation notices for potential selective enforcement." As the meeting reorganized itself around these immediate concerns, neighbors approached me one by one, some offering thanks, others sharing additional experiences they had been too intimidated to discuss previously. Noah sat quietly in his chair, watching the community finally unite against the bullying he had endured for 2 years. "Did we win, Grandpa?" he asked softly when I returned to his side. "Justice is not about winning, buddy," I replied. "It is about restoring balance and accountability, and yes, that process has begun." 6 months passed, bringing profound changes to Highland Estates. The emergency board meeting following Deborah's departure had elected Richard Thompson as interim president with a mandate for governance reform. All outstanding violation notices were suspended pending comprehensive review. An independent auditor, identified multiple financial irregularities, resulting in restitution to affected homeowners, including substantial refunds of improperly assessed fines. The criminal case proceeded with mechanical efficiency. Faced with irrefutable video evidence and multiple witnesses, Deborah accepted a plea arrangement including community service, anger management training, and probation. The civil case Walter helped me file resulted in an additional settlement covering Noah's counseling expenses and establishing a neighborhood youth program fund. Professional consequences proved equally significant. Lancaster Real Estate Development placed Deborah on administrative leave immediately following the community meeting, transitioning to permanent separation after her plea agreement. Her carefully constructed professional identity as a community leader collapsed under the weight of public records documenting her abuse of authority and physical assault of a minor. Most meaningful was the transformation within our community. The revised HOA structure implemented transparent enforcement protocols, documented appeals processes, and regularly scheduled evening meetings accessible to working residents. The atmosphere of fear and selective targeting dissolved, replaced by genuine collaborative governance focused on community well-being rather than punitive enforcement. Noah's recovery progressed steadily. Initial nightmares and anxiety about public spaces gradually subsided through professional counseling and the visible accountability Deborah faced for her actions. Watching justice unfold systematically rather than through impulsive retaliation taught him valuable lessons about patience, documentation, and proper channels for addressing wrongdoing. On the 6-month anniversary of the restaurant incident, I reserved a table at Claridge's. Noah hesitated briefly when I suggested returning to the scene of his humiliation. "Are you sure, Grandpa? What if she is there again?" "Then we will enjoy our meal regardless," I assured him. "You have every right to occupy any public space with dignity, but this return is important to replace bad memories with better ones." The staff welcomed us warmly upon arrival, the maitre d' immediately recognizing us. "Mr. Miller and Noah, we have a special table reserved near the window. The chef sends his personal regards." Noah walked confidently through the restaurant, no longer the intimidated child of 6 months earlier. He had grown nearly 2 inches since the incident, his posture straighter, his understanding of adult complexities more nuanced. The science competition ribbons had multiplied, his academic confidence undiminished by Deborah's attempt to humiliate him. The restaurant manager approached our table after we were seated. "It is wonderful to see you both again under better circumstances," he said sincerely. "In fact, our executive chef has prepared something special tonight."